The fortune teller took my hand, turned it toward the string of warm bulbs over her table, and the little diamond on my finger caught the light, and she laughed. Not a cruel laugh. That's the part one couldn't file away for a whole year. A short, startled sound, the kind you make at a joke whose ending you already know. Her eyes went from my palm, to the ring, back to my face, and something in them settled into a thing worse than mockery. Pity. She folded my fingers shut over my own coin, waved me out of her tent, and said the only real thing she'd say all night. I don't read glass, love. I was 29 and 4 months from my wedding, and I only went in because the tent was there. It was one of those traveling summer fairs, a field at the edge of town, a Ferris wheel throwing colored light across parked cars, the smell of fried dough and cut grass and diesel. He'd won me a stuffed bear at the ring toss, badly, sweetly, overpaying the man to let him keep trying until he landed one. That is the man I want you to see first, a man who'd spend $11 on a $2 bear because he couldn't stand to lose in front of me. The fortune teller's tent sat at the dark end, past the food stalls, where the bulb light gave out. $5, palms and futures on a board out front. Somebody dared me. It was $5 and I was happy. I went in laughing. I want that on the record. I went in laughing, and came out being laughed at, and it took me a year to see we'd both been laughing at the same thing. Inside it was warmer and quieter than I'd expected, the fair gone flat and far through the canvas. She was older than her sign made her sound, a heavy, tired, watchful woman with rings on every finger, none matching. Real fair worker rings. Rings she'd looked at 10,000 times. She took my hand the way you take a plate someone's handing you, businesslike. She started the patter, long life, a strong heart line, the $5 script, then tipped my hand toward the bulbs to read the palm. And she stopped reading the palm. She was looking at the ring. She turned my hand a few degrees, once, then again, watching the stone drink the light. Her thumb moved over the band, not the palm, over the metal, feeling the back of the setting the way you check the underside of a cup for the maker's mark. And then she laughed. What? I said. What is it? I was still smiling. I thought it was part of the act. She shook her head. I asked again, and her whole face had changed, the saleswoman gone, an old woman looking at me who'd plainly decided not to take my money. Go home, love, she said, kind and final, closing my hand over the coin. Have your wedding. I asked what she'd seen. She wouldn't say. I pushed the $5 at her, she pushed it back, and the only thing she'd give me, a thing I would carry like a stone in a shoe for a year, was that one line. I don't read glass. I decided she was a fraud who'd lost her nerve. That is a very easy thing to decide when a stranger frightens you and you have a dress to fit into. It stung for weeks, in the stupid way a stranger's opinion can. I'd be perfectly fine, and then I'd be rinsing a plate and hear it again. I don't read glass. I told him that night, in the car, trying to make it a funny story. He didn't laugh. He went quiet in a way I'd come to know well, a stillness that looked like hurt but was really something underneath doing sums, working out whether it had just been caught. Then he kissed the ring and said, "She's jealous, baby. Women like that always are." And I let him tuck the whole thing away, because that ring was the one thing in my life I was sure of. He'd given it to me on a bridge, on one knee, and told me it was his grandmother's, a diamond come down through his family for 100 years, resized twice, off the hand of a woman he described so warmly I felt I'd met her. He took my hand and said, "You're the last hand I'll ever hold." He actually cried. I have never felt so chosen as I did holding that cold little stone that had supposedly survived a century to find my finger. So you can see why a Fairtent fortune teller was no match for it. 100 years of family against $5 of nerve. I married him. Of course I married him. The stone threw its light around at the altar, and I thought of the reader for exactly 1 second, then not again. The wrongness came the way it always does, not a wall, but weather. In company he was the most generous man in any room, and the bill for that generosity came home and got charged, quietly, to me. He'd make big warm promises, a loan to a friend, a holiday for my mother, then let them evaporate, and somehow those people came away sure it was I who'd said no. He never said no. He just left a warm silence where the yes had been, and let me be the cold one who filled it in. I began to notice how much of him was surface, beautiful surface. I won't pretend I married a monster, monsters are easier. He was dressed the way a shop window is dressed, everything facing out, and once you were led around the back there was no storeroom behind the display. Just the back of it, and a man watching your face to see if you'd noticed. I told myself every marriage has an adjustment year. Whatever else was true, I had 100 years of diamond on my finger, proof, at least, that he came from something that had lasted. The ring saved me by breaking. About a year in, a prong caught on a sweater and bent, and the stone sat loose, tilting when I turned my hand. I was more frightened of losing it than of anything else in that marriage. On my lunch hour I took it to a small jeweler 2 streets from work, to fix the prong and, because we were grown people with a mortgage now and you insure precious things, to finally get it valued for the policy. He was a careful, gentle man who set the loupe in his eye and went quiet in a way I mistook, at first, for admiration. Then he said, "You understand this stone isn't a diamond." He was kind about it. He said it the way a good doctor tells you the thing you didn't come in for. It was glass. Paste, cut nicely, decades old, but glass, worth almost nothing. Worth rather less, in fact, than the fare ticket I'd bought the night a stranger told me exactly this and I called her a fraud. The setting was real, he said, and genuinely old. Somebody's grandmother's, quite possibly. But the diamond that had supposedly crossed 100 years to reach me had never once been in the room. And then, because I asked him to check the band for the family engraving I'd never bothered to read, because I wanted, God help me, to prove some part of the story true, he turned it under the loupe and read me a date worn nearly smooth, and a single initial. The date was more than a year before he met me. The initial wasn't mine, and it wasn't his grandmother's either. He'd bought an old setting in a pretty piece of glass, had it engraved for a woman who handed it back, and re-gifted it to me on a bridge with a story about 100 years and a line about the last hand he'd ever hold. Which meant it wasn't even the last hand he had said that to. I sat in my car outside that shop a long time, and I did not cry the way you would think. Because I wasn't there. I was back in a warm tent at the dark end of a fair, watching an old woman turn my hand to the light. I finally understood what she'd done. She hadn't read my palm at all. She'd read the ring. 40 years at fairgrounds, watching men win women bears they didn't want, handling more rings than any jeweler, every proud hand shoved across her table. She knew glass on sight, the way I did now, a year and a marriage too late. She'd tipped my hand to the bulbs, seen paste in a resized setting engraved for somebody else, taken in my whole shining certain face above it, and understood the entire man in 3 seconds, and the entire year I had not yet lived. That was the laugh. Not cruelty. Recognition. She'd seen the exact size and shape of what was coming, and she was kind enough not to charge me to hear it, and wise enough to know I wouldn't have believed a word. What do you tell a happy girl with a fair diamond and a wedding dress? Nothing. You close her hand around her coin, let her go, and let her be right about it in a year. I don't read glass. She had told me the whole marriage in 4 words. It took me a wedding and a year to translate them. I didn't stage anything. I'd love to say I slid an appraisal across a candle at dinner, but the truth is quieter, and I like it better. I had the prong fixed, the jeweler offered, gently, and I said yes, because a loose stone bothered me even then, even a glass one. I wore it home. And over the next few weeks, with no weather at all, I did the paperwork of leaving the way I'd once done the paperwork of staying. My own account. A lawyer, quietly. A small flat with a lease in my name and a window that faced the wrong way and was entirely mine. The night I left, I set the ring on his nightstand with the jeweler's little tag still tied to it, the valuation in plain numbers, and the one line describing the stone. I didn't need to say anything out loud. I'd learned the trick from a professional. You don't explain glass to the man who sold it to you. You stop wearing it, and you let the number speak. He called it dramatic. He told people I had left him over a ring. Which, In the way he meant it, was a lie, and in a truer way than he could reach, was exactly right. I did leave over the ring. Over what the ring turned out to be. Over the fact that the most precious thing in my marriage was the single thing that, held up to any honest light, went straight through it. The fair comes back every summer. I went the year after, on my own, with a $5 bill folded in my pocket. Her tent wasn't there. A man at the ring toss thought she'd stopped traveling, nobody was sure. So I never got to put the coin in her hand, or tell her she'd been right, or ask what I most wanted to, whether she'd known I would come back one day understanding, or whether she just laughed and forgot me by the next customer. I bought fried dough with the $5 instead and ate it under the Ferris wheel, and somewhere between the second bite and the bottom of the field, I did the thing I hadn't managed in the jeweler's car, or the lawyer's office, or the flat with the wrong-facing window. I laughed. The same short, startled sound she'd made. Because it is, in the end, a little funny, 100 years of nothing, a stranger who read me for free and truer than the man who married me, a woman walking out over $5 of glass and calling it the best money anyone ever refused to take. A fortune is a thing they sell you. A warning is a thing they can only give you, and you don't get to spend it until you've paid the full price of not listening. Somebody once laughed at you, or warned you, or told you a small strange thing you didn't understand until much later, until it was too late, or just barely in time. Tell me what yours was. I read every story here. The best ones become episodes.